Hey all, and welcome back to the neighborhood. Today, we're taking a look at another IM collaboration by Crinacle. This time, we have the highly anticipated SeeAudio Midnight in for review. In some ways, this Midnight is essentially a retuned Yume, and while I never got the chance to evaluate the original Yume myself, the general consensus from the audiophile community on the Yume seems to be that it was tuned well, but somewhat boring and lacking in resolution and technical capabilities. Nevertheless, the idea was that the Yume had potential. With the Midnight, Crin appears to have focused on improving the Yume from the ground up, making adjustments to the shell, the drivers, and other audio components. So from another perspective, with the Midnight, it appears to be somewhat more than a retune, as Crin and SeeAudio have essentially rebuilt this IM from the ground up. But was all the effort worth it? Let's get into it. The Midnight really is built mostly nice. The shell itself is neither too large nor too big, but it does stick out of my ear a small amount due to the length of its nozzle. Still, I found the fit of this IM to be universally ergonomic and comfortable for the most part, and it generally isolated noise decently well as well. The material of the shell itself is comprised of a nice black resin material with a carbon fiber faceplate sporting either the word Midnight or the SeeAudio emblem in silver beneath the clear top coat. The connection at the top of the IM is a flush 2-pin, and there is a small port for venting located near it. The backside of the IM sports the branding SeeAudio x Crinacle in a mustard yellow color. Inside the shell is a triple driver hybrid configuration, consisting of 2 custom-tuned BAs and a liquid silicone diaphragm dynamic. The cable included in the box with the Midnight terminates in a 3.5mm jack and is comprised of a 5N silver-plated copper. It's braided rather simply, but woven well for the most part, remaining free from kinks throughout most of my use. Yet, its ear hooks might be considered by some to be a bit too angled in an aggressive fashion. And while I generally like the silver-plated hardware affixed to this cable, the chin cinch was a mere piece of clear plastic, and somewhat cheapened the otherwise polished experience that I got with the Midnight. Inside the box, you also get a metal tin can style case, some extra filters, and 5 silicone ear tips ranging in size from super small to extra large. The various tips included sounded markedly similar to one another, and I tried a variety of aftermarket tips as well, but the sound profile of the Midnight only shifted to a certain extent. In the end, I preferred the Midnight with its stock tips installed, but also enjoyed this set with JVC spiral dots as well. The Midnight was sent to the channel by HiFiGO, and they included the SeeAudio acrylic earphone stand as well. But, per usual, other than sending these products to me, I have not been paid by HiFiGO, and HiFiGO has not attempted to influence my review in any way, shape, or form. As such, it goes without saying that all opinions and commentary are my own. So let's get back into the review and on to the sound, because that's probably why you're here. I think what Crin was after with the Midnight was a flat-sounding IM with a decent treble extension and a sub-bass emphasis without noticeable bloat into the mids. And for the most part, I think that's what he's achieved, but I also think he may have taken things a bit too far, as regrettably, there are also a number of outcomes that are simply unfortunate for the Midnight. For example, there is a clear deficit in the upper bass and lower mids, which not only impacts rhythm guitars, but also male vocals. Both seem to take a clear step back from the rest of the mix and hide more in the background on particular tracks. And let me be clear, this is not a matter of well-recorded music or not. It is consistent across genres that rely on instruments within the mid-range and upper bass region. Bass play, for example, comes across as lifeless on mid and upper bass focused tracks. For example, Flight of the Cosmic Hippo by Bela Fleck and the Flecktones was just boring to listen to, and a shell of itself when played back on the Midnight in comparison to other sets. The tonality and dynamics of the Midnight also don't help its case in terms of being one of the best IMs in the price range. There are some low-end dynamics which express themselves well from the lower bass regions of the Midnight's frequency response, but again, mid-bass and upper bass dynamics are abysmal. These produce a thud rather than a thump, and while I normally prefer a sub-bass emphasis, regrettably, there's just simply too much information missing from elevated bass regions in the Midnight's reproduction, producing a scooped sound here in the sonics. The general tonal presentation of the Midnight is also somewhat placid and lacks energy. A flat sound signature doesn't need to be this unexciting in order to be neutral, but the Midnight for the most part is. The notes themselves sound as if they're tuned to be flat. Guitars sound as if they're being played by strings that have lived past their lifespan and need to be replaced. Tonally speaking, the Midnight is the stale saltine cracker of audio, and somewhat blasé. Still, the tonality here is probably better than some of Crin's other offerings like the ZEX Pro or the Blessing 2. With that said, this is about where my criticisms of the Midnight end. In contrast to the lower mids, the upper mid-range to the treble is tuned exceptionally well and comes across smooth with acceptance to my ears. Furthermore, unlike their male counterparts, female vocals and other vocals from the upper registry come through angelically, and they do so with authority and without glare. In fact, it is the treble extension where the Midnight truly shines. Treble presence is almost perfect to my ears, clear and present without ever becoming harsh or assaultive. And while I have yet to hear the original Yume, as I already alluded to and made reference to in the introduction, the knock on it was that the tuning was well done, but it lacked energy and technicalities. More specifically, lacking both technical ability and resolution. So while I think the Midnight also lacks energy in the lower mid-range and upper regions of the bass response as well, I'm sure the Midnight is still an improvement overall on the Yume, as resolution is good for the price and technical capabilities aren't really an issue here. Separation, instrument distinctiveness, and instrument placement within the soundstage are well implemented. The soundstage isn't the widest ever, but it is decently wide with a surprising amount of depth and an appropriate amount of height to it. In comparison to the other most recent Crinacle collaboration, the FHE Eclipse, the FiGO presents a more well-rounded picture in terms of its general presentation, and it's certainly more dynamic and more energetic overall. But the treble extension of the Midnight takes the cake between the two of them, and it's here where the Midnight offers something that the Eclipse doesn't. To wrap things up, in the case of the Midnight, it has some tremendous strengths, but also a few glaring weaknesses. I love the tuning job that Crin did with the FHE Eclipse by FiGO, but I find this collaboration with SeeAudio to be a bit more underwhelming in comparison. Most problematic, the Midnight isn't really a good fit for some of my most favorite test tracks. While my test collection is actually pretty eclectic, there is a lot of music within it that relies on an accurate representation to come from the upper bass and lower mid-range portions of the frequency response. The Midnight simply lacked enough energy and its presence was just too soft in both of these regions to do the job well, at least in this particular regard. And while I tried adjusting tips with the Midnight to remedy this problem, its overall presentation wasn't really all that much affected, and I found myself defaulting back to the stock tips in the end. So while I do admire this IEM for its smooth treble extension, it isn't simply something that I can sit down and listen to a diverse playlist with. But hey, your ears and musical library might be more forgiving. For someone who listens to modern musical recordings and genres, it might even align with what the Midnight does well. Perhaps this is why other reviewers have rushed in to recommend this set. Anyhow, thanks again to HiFiGO for sending in the SeeAudio Midnight into the channel for review. If you're interested in the Midnight, I'll place a link in the description below so that you can pick one up from them. Also check out the other links in the description below for additional videos and other ways to access the channel at all its various platforms. And per usual, hit like and subscribe before taking off. And with that, I'm out for now.